This is the Homestead Journey Podcast, the podcast dedicated to the pursuit of self-sufficiency, self-reliance, and sustainability. This is episode number 95 of the Homestead Journey Podcast. Welcome, everyone. Here we are creeping up on episode number 100. Very excited about that. And I just want to say thank you to all of you who listened to this podcast. In the last couple of weeks, we actually crossed the 100,000 download threshold. And so thank you very much for helping make that happen and just being a part of this journey. If you've been with me for a long time, I really appreciate your support. And those of you who are new to the show, welcome. I am so glad that you found us. And I would love to hear from you and, your story, an introduction. That's one of the things about podcasting. It sometimes feels like I am on the edge of the Grand Canyon, hollering out into the great abyss. Is anyone listening? And so I always love it when I hear from my listeners. It really encourages me and helps me keep going. And really, it helps me keep heading in the right direction, because this show is not about me, although I do talk a lot about the things that we do here on our homestead. But this show is about you and trying to help you take that next right step on your journey towards self-sufficiency, self-reliance, and sustainability. And so by you reaching out to me with questions and comments and so on and so forth, it really helps me stay focused and headed in the right direction. So if there's something that you'd love to hear on the show and I've not already covered it, or maybe I didn't cover it well, let me know that, and I certainly will add it to the queue of topics for the future. Now, to a certain extent right now, folks, I feel a little bit like a fish out of water because it's been several weeks since I've actually done this. Although I did not miss a podcast episode over the last couple of weeks, we were on vacation. So if I sound a little bit rusty, well, I'm sorry about that. But by way of introduction, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Brian. I am coming to you from 3B Farm and Homestead here in beautiful upstate New York. And like I said, I am just back from vacation. So today's podcast is probably going to be a little bit short on the homestead happenings piece, a little bit longer on the charting the course, but overall, hopefully it's going to be a great episode. So without further ado, let's hop right into this week's homestead happening. Before we get into the vacation piece of it, there are just a couple of things that I did want to make you aware of. I don't remember, and I didn't go back and listen to the episodes from a couple of weeks ago, but I had shared with you that I had some exciting news and that I would be sharing that on social media, which I did. I'm just not sure if I mentioned this on the podcast. So if you don't follow us on social media, why don't you? Head on over to Facebook or Instagram, YouTube. We're on all of those, and I would be glad to interact with you there. But we had a very special guest here on the homestead several weeks ago, and they did a feature piece on us that actually ran statewide here in New York on the Spectrum News Network. And so if you would like to see that piece, they did a great job editing it, and it actually made me sound semi-coherent. So I was glad of that. They were actually here for over 2 hours shooting video and then boiled it down to like 2.5 minutes or something like that. But they did a great job editing it. And so if you're interested in seeing that, head on over to Facebook or Instagram. I believe I've linked to them there. Also on our website, I linked to it there. So anyhow, I was very excited about that. But I'm also very excited because I was recently interviewed for a local paper. And so there'll be a piece featuring us coming out in that. I'll be sharing that on all of our social media accounts as well. And then if you are in the area, if you live somewhere in the vicinity of me here in beautiful upstate New York, mark on your calendar Saturday, August 28th. Saturday, August 28th at 4 p.m. I will be speaking on the topic of modern homesteading in the County Bounty Building at the Washington County Fair. Now, the Washington County Fair happens to be the best fair in all of fairdom. Maybe I'm a little bit biased. Absolutely love that fair, but I am honored to be speaking on the topic of modern homesteading. So if you are interested in being a part of that, come on out to see a wonderful fair, #1 agricultural fair in all of New York State. I believe that hands down. We have the most cows on the grounds at any one time of any fair in New York State, even more than the state fair. Now, the state fair, over the course of the state fair, will have more cows there because they cycle breeds through, but they don't have as many cows on the fairgrounds as what we will have at the Washington County Fair. We have chickens, we have pigs. We'll actually be showing pigs. Rabbits, a great county bounty building where they show vegetables, canned goods, candy crafts. It's just a great fair, all of the great fair foods, great shows. And of course, if you come on Saturday, August 28th, I will be speaking at 4 p.m. in the County Bounty Building. So very excited about that and honored to do so. With all of that said, let's talk a little bit about vacation. So we spent about a week down in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. This was actually a vacation that we were supposed to do 2 years ago. And then my son, the Wednesday before we were leaving on Friday, my son dislocated his knee. And so consequently, vacation got canceled that year. And we had to kind of get creative. We did some day trips, but by and large, our vacation that year was canceled. And so we rescheduled that for this year. The idea being that we were halfway between Gettysburg and Philadelphia, so we could do kind of the history type things. We could run up to Hershey, and then we could do all of the Lancaster stuff. Not to give you the blow-by-blow of everything that we did on vacation. That's not really what you're here to listen to. But from a homesteading perspective, there was a lot of great stuff that I saw in that area. And then I wanted to share with you just some kind of takeaways that I was kind of taken aback, I guess, by in Lancaster County. Now, many people, when they think of Lancaster County, they think of the Amish and they go to see the Amish, and that's certainly a part of it. We did enjoy some of that. But I, of course, was looking at it more just from a homesteader perspective. And one of the things that was very interesting to me as we drove around was the architecture there, particularly of the barns, and how the barns were built, a lot of them with kind of a stone foundation, wooden top with a bit of an overhang at the bottom. And then they had stalls. Almost every barn had stalls built right into the basement, so to speak, of the barns. The houses were beautiful. And one of the things that I just noticed as we drove around, and we did a lot of driving, we spent a lot of time in the car, it really surprised me how many people had vegetable gardens. And it's not just Amish people, although I'm sure a lot of them were, but there were vegetable gardens at just about every house that I saw. And not only were there vegetable gardens, but they had flowers in their gardens. Most places were beautifully landscaped with beautiful flowers. And I was just really amazed by all of that, the beauty of these little farms. You would go around a bend and there was another little farm. And I'm used to up here in upstate New York, a lot of the farms over the years of the small family farms have kind of fallen out of favor. And now the farms that exist are milking 700-800 head of cattle. And there really aren't those small little farms anymore that are active. You drive by the smaller farms here in upstate New York, and the barns are, if they're still standing, they're not being used anymore for agricultural purposes. Maybe they're storing cars or junk or whatever. Many of the barns are starting to fall down. It's kind of sad to see. And it was just a joy to see every turn I went around, there was another small farm and it was active. And, I don't know how many cows they had, but it sure wasn't 700 or 800. But they were active farms. And so it was very exciting to see that. And the other thing that was really interesting to me is you would sometimes be driving by a farm on the left, and on the other side of the road was a subdivision, and then you would come right into town, and then you would come right out of town, and there was another working farm right there. Like the barn was the next house in a row of houses, and then bam, there's a barn, and there's cows, and there's chickens, and there's goats, and whatever. And it was just really weird. We don't see that much here, where where there are active farms. And the county that I live in is actually a very agricultural county. As I was sharing with regards to the fair, that's a representation of this county, and yet it's not like that. There's a very fine delineation between town and farms, and unfortunately, in the areas to the south of us that used to be more farming type communities, as the suburbs have come in and the suburban sprawl has taken place, the farms have been crowded out, and maybe there's barns standing, but they certainly aren't active farms any longer. So it was very interesting to see that. It was also interesting to see kind of a diversification with regards to the crops that people planted. So even on these smaller farms, I saw soybeans, I saw corn, I saw vegetables, I saw broadleaf tobacco. It just seemed that even these smaller farms were practicing diversity in ways that a lot of the farms in our area don't. Most of the farms in our area, it's either hay or corn. That's it. So to see that level of diversity, even on these smaller farms, was just something that was really great to see. And so I just really enjoyed all of that. I just kind of took it all in. I don't know what all of that means, to be honest with you. I'm not sure how that's going to affect me or influence the way that I garden. I think that I have been planting more flowers in my garden over the last several years. I think that's going to keep propelling me in that direction. Not only is there beauty in that, but also it does attract the pollinators. And so I like that. But it was just great to see almost everywhere you went, people had, and I'm talking sizable, beautiful vegetable gardens mixed with flowers, and then just beautiful landscaping. And so it was really, really great to see. But it was a great vacation. We had to be flexible. Some things didn't necessarily go according to plan. We weren't able to get to Philadelphia like we had hoped because of some COVID restrictions that kind of came into play, but we made the best we could with what we had to work with. And I think we made some great memories. My son enjoyed it. And unfortunately, folks, we're getting to the end. And if I stop long enough to think about it, I get a little bit melancholy. If we're lucky, we have one, maybe two, family vacations left with him before he heads off to college, and then things change. And so I really did try to enjoy every moment of this vacation, and was very glad that we were able to do it. We had some neighbors, some friends and neighbors that really stepped up. My dad and helped take care of the animals in the homestead while we were gone. But certainly being gone for a week meant that coming back, we came back on Friday. We got back, I think, about 3:00 in the afternoon on Friday. And then at 5:00, my son and I headed over to another scout's house, and we did a camp out Friday night with the scouts across the road on some land that his grandfather owns. And so it was kind of like vacation, bam, right to that. And unfortunately, and it pains me to admit this as the scoutmaster of a group that's always supposed to be prepared, but I did not prepare well for that camping trip. And what I mean by that is this: when we camp up there, and any opportunity that I have to do so, I love to hammock camp. I hate sleeping in a tent. I hate it with a passion for so many reasons, besides the fact that it's uncomfortable. I just hate the way tents kind of sometimes get that clammy feeling, and just a lot about tent camping that I don't like. I love sleeping in a hammock. So I had set my hammock up, got my bug net up, had my ridge line run, and was getting ready to put the tarp over top of it. And the guy I was with said, "Oh, don't worry about that. It's not supposed to rain. We're not supposed to get rain for several weeks." And I hadn't been paying attention to the weather. And so, okay, he says we're not supposed to get rain. So I didn't put the tarp over the hammock. Well, that was a very poor decision on my part because at about 4 o'clock in the morning, I was woken up with what I thought was wind, but then it sounded like, of course, we're in these trees. So I really wasn't quite sure if it was just the leaves rustling. And so then I went back to sleep. And about 10 minutes later, the fountains of the deep opened up and it just poured. And so I was running in the dark. It's a wooded area, and right along the edge of it is a barbed wire fence that you kind of have to navigate. There's certain sections where it's down, so you can kind of get over it. So I was trying to do that very quickly in the dark, in the rain. And by the time I got my tarp back, everything was just absolutely soaked. And so I spent the rest of the, well, I guess evening, morning, whatever, from about 4 o'clock in the morning till about 7 o'clock in the morning in a wet hammock with a wet quilt and just soaked to the bone, miserable. So was a great way to kick off Saturday, knowing that I had a lot of work to do and I did not get great sleep. But Saturday, after going to an Eagle Court of Honor of a friend of mine, I played garden catch up all day long. I got back from the Eagle Court of Honor, I think it was around noon, and they'd invited me to stay for lunch, but it's like, I've got way too much to do. I'm going to go home. I'm going to grab a quick bite and I'm going to head out to the garden and get busy. Well, I came home and forgot to eat lunch and went out, and I spent all afternoon, all day really, in the garden and then mowing the lawn, and it was hot and I didn't drink right and I didn't eat at all. All I had all day was a chocolate muffin at the end of the camp out. And by the end of the day, folks, I felt like I was going to pass out. I mean, I really did. I was lightheaded. I had a headache. I was sick to my stomach. It was just really not smart on my part. And so I did not get anywhere near as much done as I wanted to do. But going through and trying to do that garden catch up and trying to understand, okay, what's come on when I was going out, when I was away and I wasn't anticipating it. What has kind of died, what needs to be pulled. And of course the weeds that need to be dealt with, because, well, my plan that I had with regards to spending 10 minutes a day, it was beautiful for a while. And then life happened. And then of course we were on vacation. And so I didn't spend any time in the garden weeding. And so I had to catch up on all of that. And so it was just a crazy, crazy day yesterday. And what I discovered is that I've got a lot of work ahead of me. I've got cucumbers coming on, so I'm gonna have to do some pickles this week. Cherry tomatoes are finally starting to ripen. So I had my first cherry tomatoes. My big tomatoes, actually, a lot of fruit, but nothing is starting to ripen yet. And it looks like at least a couple of them have some blight. So I'm worried about how that's gonna, what that's gonna do to the rest of the tomatoes. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. My zucchini and summer squash, some of that is still coming on like gangbusters, and some of it, like I shared before, is dead. So I pulled that all out. I pulled all of the lettuce that had bolted, so need to plant some more of that. Definitely have got beets that I've got to deal with, beans that I've got to deal with. So just a lot of work ahead of me in the garden this coming week. And but the chickens and the pigs ate good with the weeds that I pulled. And so I'm excited about how the gardens are looking right now. I've got peppers coming on that are looking great. My squash in my root stout bed is just going like gangbusters. My second planting of English peas and the root stout bed have all come up. The second planting of snow peas that I did in the raised beds have not come up well. So I don't know if I'm going to get much there, or if maybe they're just a little slow to germinate. But overall, things in the garden are looking great, but I've got to play a lot of catch up this week because, well, it didn't go on vacation like I did. Finally, today, my mom, dad, and Bonnie and I, we did up corn. So one of the things that we do every year is we buy corn from a local family. I don't plant any sweet corn in any of my gardens just because the amount of room that it takes versus what you get, I just would rather buy it from somebody who can do it on a larger scale. And so we always buy 150 ears roughly. And then we will cut it off the cob and freeze it, because I like frozen corn way better than I like canned corn. and it's just something we do once a year. And so they let us know that the corn was ready earlier than they had anticipated. And so it was just one more thing coming back from vacation. Boom, we've got to do corn. One of the things that I saw a couple of weeks ago online was I saw kind of a new way that I had never seen before on how to remove the kernels of corn from the cob. And that is that there were some people using angel food pans and just pressing the cobs down through the center hole. And that was, in essence, cutting the kernels off of the cob. And I thought, oh, that looks great. We should try that. And so this year, we went ahead and set everything up outdoors. Normally, what we'll do is we'll husk everything outside, then we bring it in and we blanch the corn indoors. My mom and Bonnie would cut it off the kernels. We would be packing it into bags, and Dad and I would be running up and down to the freezer and all of that kind of stuff. We kind of had this assembly line thing going on. Well, so we're going to try putting this outdoors today, and we're going to try this new method of the angel food pans. Well, I contacted the person who had made the video and got the dimensions as far as the holes that they were using. And they said, well, the one angel food cake pan had a hole that was 1.25 inches. And then if the cob was too big for that, they had another one that was 1.5 inches. So we actually had on hand, I think my mom and dad had on hand an angel food cake pan that had the hole that was 1.5 inches. And we bought a bunt pan that had a hole that was 1.25 inches. I got everything set up today. We had kind of this assembly line set up, and folks, it just didn't work for us. I was having to really push and I mean, really exert a lot of energy to try to get those ears through that bunt pan. But then if I tried to go from that up to the angel food cake pan that had the 1.5 inch hole, it was too big. So it's like I needed something kind of in between. Now, I don't know what variety of corn they were using, but if you ever saw the video, I don't think I shared it on any of our social media pages. I think I just shared it on my personal page. But I mean, they were just like slicker and snot on a glass doorknob. I mean, they were just pushing it through and bam, 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 bam. Those kernels were just popping off. But for us, it just didn't work. And so I did it for, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 minutes. And it was just, I mean, my shoulders were starting to hurt. And so this isn't great. So we went back to cutting the kernels off. My wife found this great Kernel Cutter, and I think I might have actually put a link to it in our Amazon shop. So if you head on over to the homesteadjourney.net/shop, I think there's a link to it there on Amazon, and that thing just works great. So you cut the kernels off with that, and then we take a spoon and kind of scrape the cob to make sure we get everything off. There's no waste, and pretty much you're just left with a dry cob, and it works great for us. And so today, in a couple of hours, we did up, it was, I think, 160 ears. And so we've got our corn for the year, and I love it. Way better than anything you can buy in the store, and just absolutely delicious. And being able to do that with my mom and dad and make memories, I mean, it's just a win, 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 win. So anyhow, that was today. And so, man, it seems like this homestead happening segment for a guy who was on vacation actually went rather long. So I apologize for that. No, I don't. All right, let's head on over to this week's Charting the Course. While I was on vacation, I did not spend a lot of time on social media, but I did scroll through the odd homesteading group now and again. And what I saw there at times horrified me. Well, I don't want to say horrified me because that's probably a bit of an overstatement. But I saw people who are new to canning making, in my opinion, some pretty serious mistakes. And so I wanted to do an episode on what I am calling the 5 biggest mistakes people new to canning have a tendency to make. Now, I am somebody who is just a very, very strong advocate for safe canning practices. I'm not somebody who is and I hate to use the term canning Nazi because I feel like that cheapens the term Nazi, but you know what I'm talking about. There are some people that if you deviate a teaspoon from a recipe, they lose their minds. I'm not somebody quite that crazy about it, but I do strongly believe, especially if you are brand new to canning, that it is imperative that you follow very strict canning rules that can be found in places like the Ball Blue Book of Canning or on the National Center for Home Food Preservation website, which is nchfp.uga.edu. There are a couple of groups on Facebook where it's kind of this wild, wild west, anything goes. And that scares me. And that scares me because if you do not can food properly, you can end up with botulism. Botulism is something that cannot be tasted, it cannot be smelled. So you don't know that it's there, and it can kill you. And I don't say that to scare anybody away from canning, because if you follow good canning practices with tested recipes, you're going to be okay. It's when you start going rogue and you start rolling the dice that you endanger not only yourself, but you endanger your friends and your family and anybody that you serve that food to. Because most people, even though they tell you that you're supposed to boil canned goods for 5 minutes, most people don't do that. And so if you are not following good canning practices up front, then the fact of the matter is you put yourself at risk for severe sickness and potentially even death. So I say that to scare you, but I also don't want to scare you away from canning. Again, if you follow good, safe practices, you're going to be okay. And so on today's episode, we're going to talk about the 5 biggest mistakes I see people new to canning make. The first one, and this is probably the biggest mistake I see people make, and that is they use the wrong method to process a particular item. If you are canning low acid vegetables or you are canning meat, in my opinion, you should always, always, always pressure can them. In my opinion, it is not safe to hot water bath low acid fruits and vegetables or, God forbid, meat. Now, there are people who will tell you they've done it for a long time over in the old country. Yeah, but there are a lot of people who have died in the old country, and there are a lot of people who died or have gotten very sick here in the United States because of improperly processed foods. When the Ball Blue Book of Canning was written, and when the National Center for Home Food Preservation puts out advisories, they do not do so because they're killjoys. They don't put those out because they don't want you to have fun or experiment in your kitchen. They do that not because there's some government conspiracy that is trying to tell you what you can do and not do within your own home. Neither one of them have anything to do with the government. What they are doing is trying to help you be safe and safely process foods so that you don't sicken your family. So in my opinion, it's very, very important, whether you're water bath canning or you're pressure canning or you're steam canning, that you use the right method, the right application, the right tool for the job. You don't need to be afraid of pressure canners. And that's one of the things I don't understand, why people are so resistant to pressure canners. You can get pressure canners relatively inexpensively, less than a couple of $100. You don't have to go out and buy an All-American. You can start out with a Miro. You can start out with a Presto. There's nothing to be afraid of with regards to pressure canners. In my opinion, I'm more scared of people utilizing the wrong method and water bath canning things that should have been pressure canned than there is to be afraid of a pressure canner blowing up. If you follow good practices, you make sure basically that the top hole on your pressure canner isn't plugged, it's not going to blow up. If you don't walk off and leave it unattended, you don't go take a nap while you're canning. As long as you use some common sense, there's nothing to be afraid of with regards to pressure canning. If you don't know how to do it or you're afraid to do it, find a mentor. There are classes online. I hope to offer something probably early next year on how to can safely. But if you have questions, ask me. I am more than happy. I would love to help you can safely and not endanger your family because you were afraid of a pressure can or instead decided you were going to roll the dice and hot water bath green beans. Please, please, please don't do that. The other piece to it as well, folks, is especially with the all-American canners, it is quicker to actually pressure can them than it is to hot water bath them, as long as people say you have to in order for it to be quote unquote safe. I understand why people are hesitant because they haven't been around it. And so anything new, there's a sense of, oh my goodness, I'm going to blow things up. Trust me, folks, there are safety features on the new pressure canners. Even on the All-Americans that have been around for years and years and years, there's safety features there. You're not going to blow anything up and you're going to be doing yourself a service because you're using the right tool for the job. The second mistake I see people new to canning make is they use untested recipes. Be very, very wary of recipes that you find online that call for canning. Be very wary of them. In fact, in my opinion, if you're brand new to canning, you should stay away from them until you've got some experience under your belt. After a while, you're going to be able to look at a recipe and have a general understanding as far as whether or not the processing times, the processing type makes sense. But in the beginning, you should be using the Ball Blue Book of Canning, or you should be using the recipes on a place like the National Center for Home Food Preservation, tested recipes, because what they've done is they have gone through, they've tested them to ensure that the processing times and the processing temperatures and the pressures and so forth are correct to ensure that the foods in those jars is not going to kill you or make you sick. So if you're brand new to canning, please, please, please avoid untested recipes. The third mistake that I see people new to canning make is that they can too much of one thing. Now, at times I've been guilty of this. Last year, we canned way too many green beans. But now this year, what am I doing? I have planted very few green beans. And instead, I planted dry beans. So the green beans from last year, they're going to be fine for several years. But you need to stop and think, and some of this goes back to even how you plan your garden. And I did an episode about that, actually back on episode number 6, all the way back on episode number 6. So almost 90 episodes ago, I actually did an episode where I talked about you need to think about your harvest before you plant your garden. But when you're brand new to gardening, you're brand new to this, sometimes you plant too many things or things do better than what you've expected. And so you have a glut, whether it's of cucumbers, of tomatoes, of whatever. Well, some people really enjoy the process of canning, and maybe you plan on giving away a lot of canned goods. And again, if you're going to do that, that's why it's important to ensure that you practice safe canning methods so that you're not endangering the lives of the people that you're trying to bless with your canned goods that you give away. But stop and think about what you as a family eat over a particular year. I saw somebody a couple of days ago who she and her daughter had canned up in one afternoon. I think it was like 160 quarts of pickles. Now, I don't know how big their families are, and maybe they love pickles like nobody I've ever seen before. But stop and think, if the two of them just divide that half and half, so that's 80 quarts of pickles between the two of them. That's more than a quart of pickles every week that you have to eat to get through all of that in a year. So when you are canning things, think about what you're going to use in a year, because it's not that things go bad if they've been in the jars for more than a year. It's not like all of a sudden you hit the 1 year mark, oh, you got to throw it out, it's bad. It's not that at all. But as things are in the jar for a longer period of time, they start to degrade. And maybe pickles become a little mushy. Green beans maybe become a little bit more mushy, etc. So try to shoot for canning what you think you're going to use within a year. And then if you have a glut of whatever it is, whether it's beans, instead of canning green beans, maybe try dilly beans. Figure out what else you can do with those besides just doing green beans or doing 150 jars of pickles, unless you eat that many pickles during a year. But that's the third mistake I see people new to canning make, and that is that they can too much of one thing. The fourth mistake I see people new to canning make, and this is even mistakes I see people who have been canning for a while make. I don't understand why they do it, but there's this obsession with flipping jars upside down. You don't need to do that, folks. You do not need to flip jars upside down in order to get a good seal. And in fact, sometimes that actually works against you, because what can happen is food particles can start getting between the lid and the jar, and it will actually keep things from sealing correctly. So you don't need to flip anything upside down. Keep the jars upright. Let them cool for about 24 hours before you remove the rings, but leave them upright. And that leads me to mistake number 5, and that is people storing canned jars with the ring still on it. You don't want to do that. What that's going to do is it's going to create what are called false seals. If a jar did not seal correctly, you want that lid to come off. You don't want something holding it in place, because what's going to happen is it's food inside of that is going to start to spoil. Now, hopefully your nose is good enough that you're going to smell it, or there's going to be mold that is going to build up, and then you're going to say, oh, I don't want to eat that. But you certainly don't want to have those rings holding in place that lid if it did not seal properly. You want to know that right away. So either you can use that food right up, you can process it a second time, or you can discard it if it has been sitting around for a while. So those are my thoughts. Those are the 5 biggest mistakes I see people making, people who are new to canning. If you've got questions with regards to canning, folks, I've been doing this now for a very long time. My mom and dad have been doing this for a very long time. And I'm glad to answer questions. I don't claim to be an expert in a lot of areas, hardly any areas, in fact. But this is an area where I do have a lot of information that I want to share with people to make sure that you are safe. You don't need to be afraid of canning, but you need to treat it with respect. And some of the stuff that I see people doing, it scares me. And you may get away with it for a long time, but it only takes once. It only takes once, folks. And I don't say that to scare you, and yet I say that to scare you. Canning's great. I love it. It's a great way to preserve food. It's a lot of fun, but do it safely. All right, that's it for this episode of the Homestead Journey. Thanks so much for listening.
Brian can be reached by emailing him at brian@thehomesteadjourney.net or by contacting him via our social media accounts on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube. If you've enjoyed this episode and you'd like to support this podcast, we invite you to become a member of the Supporting Listeners Program. For $10 a month or $100 per year, you will receive access to a community of like-minded individuals via a private Facebook group, at least one monthly live Q&A with Brian, the opportunity to participate in live recordings of the podcast, access to an ever-expanding library of helpful homesteading content, and so much more. Head on over to support.thehomesteadjourney.net for more information and to sign up today. As always, the music on this episode was provided by audionautics.com. So a big shout out to them.
And until next time, everybody, keep up the good work.